thought so. I just didn't want to teach you to suck eggs and you're like, yeah, I fucking know. I'm not stupid.
Well, it's good if there's a specific way you like to do it.
No, it doesn't really matter.
As long as they're not in the way.
Well, precisely. That's all we want to do. And these are quite nice because there's one nice wire, so very easy.
Yeah.
Oh dear. We've been doing some 35mm showings this week.
Oh, really?
And last week, yeah. It's my first time I've ever done it. It's really exciting.
Cool.
Yeah, James is going to do some later. I don't know. Maybe it'll be just after we go. But yeah, pretty cool.
Very cool.
Have you been watching The Traitors?
Yeah.
It's the final tonight.
Last night, I know.
Are you going to try and run home and get it, or do you reckon you're going to miss it?
Well, if we're done by 7:30, I might be able to make it home.
Yeah, well, that's exactly because on my time, on my whatever you call it, rota, it said that I was supposed to finish at 8:30, and I was like, shit, I'm not going to be able to see it. But actually, based on the running order we got, I think it will be perfect.
Just make it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be good. Well, if not, I'll just start it late.
No, exactly.
My husband is under strict orders not to watch it until I get back.
Yeah, well, of course.
So
that'd be so cool.
If he does, divorce.
Well, it's that's I watch
Seems
it.
reasonable, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Thanks.
I watch it with my parents, so it's kind of the same.
They come and watch it without you.
Then I kill them. Yeah.
Very on brand.
Yeah, that'd be good. Murder. Who do you think's gonna win? I think it has to go one way, right?
I think, based on the edit,
Yeah.
I think they have. I think it might be the Traitors that win.
Do you reckon? Because they're obviously trying to skew it like the faithfuls have figured it out.
Yes, which I don't know. I'm basing that almost entirely on
Like
the fact that
meta
they just-
production.
Yeah, meta production. What would make the most interesting thing
Yeah,
to
definitely.
do? But I suspect like it's gonna go. So like the wild card is David.
Yeah, well, exactly. He can be swayed, can't he? Because I was thinking, in theory, they could like, well, Joe is obviously him and Nick are traitors, and they're trying to put
Yeah.
you against us.
I think as well that the tricky thing is that he's almost too smart.
Which
Is
one, Joe?
David.
Oh
No,
yeah,
So he'll be overthinking
yeah,
that whole thing,
yeah.
whereas Nick and the one thing I can't get my head around is why it never makes any sense to them that like say Nick telling them the plan
Yeah.
and they're like, oh, that makes you really suspicious, and I'm like, well, why would he tell
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, I thought that was really dumb as well. They were like, well, all I know is that you're lying. And you're like, but he's not, because he just told you that he's done it.
Yeah, he had no impetus to do so.
Like, it would be so dumb to do that. And I can't believe that Kate was also in it for so long.
Yeah, I know.
Like, every time I was like, oh my god, go away.
Cracking me up there.
Yeah, she was, but she's so silly. Just anything.
Everyone's saying like, can't believe that she's a like investigative reporter.
I know, well, I saw a clip of her on the news, just on TikTok today, and I was like, oh god, you do journalism. It's hilarious.
Yes, she's set now everyone's opinion of her. Possibly people who now didn't know her before, now only know her from that.
Yeah, well, this is kind of the same with me. Like, I guess I knew her to a level, but not really. And now I'm like, no, you're quite silly. These little buttons are stupid. Thank you.
Yeah, either way, it's been a very fun watch. I think I've enjoyed it more than the normal one.
Yeah, I have as well. It's just been the better vibe. The last series was really good.
Yeah.
In regards to the PowerPoint,
Yes.
is it going to be off your laptop? Or
Yeah, it can be. Yeah.
so that all is set up for a laptop to be plugged in.
Okay.
And we've got a clicker on the right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I can go get
It's
mine.
only 2 slides anyway, I think. Isn't it?
Okay, great.
Yes. Yeah.
Cool, I'll go get it.
Yeah, Abby's not here, so
Oh, brilliant.
yeah.
We just had someone arrive to set up.
Oh yeah.
On board some tables in W3.
Okay.
She wasn't sure how much.
Okay, I'll go and take 10 instead. Yeah. Oh, I don't need that one, Victoria. I just because there's no space for it really in here, so I tend to just put the sign up on the radiator.
Oh, no worries.
And then I'll move it
Oh, yeah.
later. Yeah. Thank you. Let me just put this up a minute. Grab that.
Thank you so much. How are you? I had a job and I was like, do you know what, if I do it, it's going to look naff. I know exactly the person who will not make it look naff. I've already spied your creativity.
How's the job going then?
I love it.
You love it?
I like the creativity.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I like the creativity within the job role. I like the fact that you, within the creativity, with like kind of like you know what you can and can't do because of like
That's a bit,
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I completely forgot about the maths. I was like, I still want to help. So I felt really bad when I messaged you so late on, but
No, don't worry. I mean, like, you're always welcome to help out at any event. Like, we just need to say the word. And I think because our team is bigger now, like, we don't perhaps, I think perhaps Abby just didn't, well, Abby also didn't really know that you helped, so.
I completely forgot.
No, don't worry about it.
It's
Okay.
I just popped the clicker on the
Oh,
side there.
excellent.
So that
Thank
should
you.
work for you.
He's pretty chill though, isn't he?
Yeah, he's so chill,
Yeah.
but like I think he was also like, I don't even know what to say.
No, I bet he doesn't.
I was like,
I bet he's just like, sit tight.
I was like, it's been so stiff lately. I was like, I won't affect this. Hey, are you okay? Yeah, I'm good. I'm just getting over a cold.
Oh no. So much going around.
I know.
Is he doing enough?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I had a cold last week. It just caught up my daughter and then
Sometimes
loads
that
of my
time of
friends.
year, isn't it? Yeah. Like the kids get back to school and then they come back with all their germs.
Oh yeah.
Sure do. I just like look at things.
Make sure everything is shut down.
My little boy climbed into bed and he was was this close to my face and he did a massive sneeze. I was like, that is
Oh,
disgusting.
no.
I really didn't like that. Really nice. Look at the little thing. What did I? No, my vision officer.
I was just about to say, I was like, I'm looking at this. Where's it go?
Oh.
Maybe it doesn't.
I have this.
Oh yeah, no, that's it.
Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah.
Where does that go?
How many event people does it take to put up a banner?
When we're really sure. That sounds live.
Sounds working.
What I might... Is there someone on before me?
I don't know. I'll trust it.
Because I might just move it down a little bit for...
No worries at all. For me.
I might just lower stuff. Yeah, walk dog.
I'm alright. 1 second. Yes.
Is that today?
Yes.
Okay.
And
Brilliant. I'm
Lynn,
going to.
who was here, she was here. Just so you know.
Is it over here?
I think so. Hello, sorry about that.
No, all good. So I found my seat.
Yes.
That's good.
Yeah.
And then I just checked my phone already.
Yes.
So
Ellen just went through the suggestion, but I think she felt it might be better just to do it at the beginning, and then she can just say
Straight to
introductions.
it.
Yeah, is that okay with you?
that's fine, yeah. It was only because having people two of them up,
Yeah.
then talk about their sisters not on stage.
I know, and
So
she's
she did say, oh, she's, you're welcome to join us on stage if
you
you
want, but she's like, oh, it's fine, just
Yeah.
sit here and then
Yeah.
come up in a minute.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So
it's
in
fine.
that case, that's no worries at all. I will go into the car. Are they all in the bar?
They are all in Waterside 3. I'll take you down one now.
Do you want me to stay here, Jem, or?
Do you want the drinks then? I think I've got water.
There'll be water. There'll be water up there.
I'm sure I do.
Well, when you think of it, let me know and I can get you one. I'll take them.
Jill, maybe just a second.
Yeah. Okay. Do you do that? It's just in there, yeah. Thanks.
So you don't want me going through?
sense of humour. It's just
It's a crime, you know, that
dry.
crime. Up you. I know it's not your friend.
Maybe
Okay.
it is.
Yeah.
Maybe it is a similar thing.
Riding the front row? Yeah. On the front row?
Hello, hello. We're working. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. It's a pleasure to see you. Welcome to UE's Bristol Distinguished Address series. This evening's theme is navigating change, leadership, creativity, and the future of publishing. Just a few very light topics there for us to get into tonight. I'm Mel Rodriguez. I'll be your kind of top and tail for the evening. I'm a recent UE honorary alumni. Thank you, UE. That was a real pleasure. And by day, I'm Chief Exec at Creative Access. So Creative Access is a UK-wide social enterprise providing career-long support to creatives from underrepresented groups. And I have a connection there to Stephen, who'll be talking about some of the work he's done for Creative Access too later. I'm also, by the way, a career-long Bristolian, so came here from the Midlands many moons ago and have been really lucky enough to grow my career here. So it's great to be able to be here and share some of those insights with all of you as well. My connection to UE is one from the last decade of working with students to help them in their next career moves and to navigate a really changing industry, which I think is quite apt for this evening's conversation, because via the lens of publishing, we're looking at how we can now build forward in what is a fast evolving and sometimes quite disruptive and turbulent industry, but one that we all love being a part of. So in a minute, I'll hand over to Lynn and Stephen, who have been doing all the talent nurturing work, by the way, for many more years than I have, and who are both mentors of mine, actually. So it's a lovely full circle moment. But before I hand over to them, a little bit of housekeeping. So just to let you know, there are no fire alarm tests planned. So if the alarm does sound, we will follow the watershed stewards, who will show us to the exits. There's two behind you and one there. This event this evening is being recorded. That's to be shared on the UE website and podcast. So please do turn your phones off or to silent to avoid any random sound effects on the video. Order of play tonight, we'll hear from Lynn and Stephen, and then around 7:20 we'll welcome Mavis Birungi onto the stage to join the conversation about her career path to date. And then around 7:30 we'll open up the floor to any questions for our speakers, and then at 7:45 we'll all be popping into the bar and hopefully continuing the social and also connecting with some more UE creative alumni to share some of their content and projects. Okay, so just a quick few words on our speakers tonight. So I'll start with Stephen Page, OBE. So Stephen is the non-executive chair at Faber Faber, which is one of the world's leading independent publishing houses. And he was chief exec there from 2001 to 2021. He discovered his love of literature in his early 20s, and he worked at houses such as Transworld, Fourth Estate and HarperCollins before being appointed to Faber. He's a really strong advocate of the creative sector and all of us who work in it, and he works closely with the government to build that thriving creative sector, sitting on important kind of government bodies like the Creative Industries Council, and recently contributed to the Creative Growth Task Force, informing the current sector plan that is being rolled out. If that didn't keep him busy enough, he's a visiting professor at City University of London, and until recently he chaired the board at Creative Access. I hope me coming in didn't prompt your departure, Stephen. I'm
safe hands, in fact.
Thank you. That was a good answer. Just by coincidence, we were slightly passing ships, but not strangers. So Stephen is also a trained business coach. He's certainly given me lots of fantastic mentoring, and he runs his own coaching practice. But it's not all about books. His punk rocker lifestyle has followed him through the years, and he remains a drummer in a 90s cover band called The Landline. Sadly, the drums aren't here tonight, but hopefully we're going to hear about your musical endeavours as well as your publishing ones. And also on to Lynn, fellow rock star, of course. So Lynn Barlow is the Assistant Vice-Chancellor for the Creative and Cultural Industries Engagement for UE, and a freelance exec producer. Her career spans newspapers, radio and TV. She covered health and social affairs as a BBC correspondent and produced groundbreaking doc series, including The Anatomy of a Crime series, which won the Grierson Award for Best Documentary. Lynn is also a trustee at the Royal Television Society and also at Wildscreen and a voting member of BAFTA. She was also part of this government task force that developed the 2025 Creative Industries Sector Plan. I'm dying to hear about the tea and biscuits at this task force, by the way. It sounds like a lot was done during that session. These are our two main speakers, and then I'll just give you a quick bio for Mavis Burunji, who is joining them on stage a bit later. So Mavis is a UWE alumni, Ugandan-born British actor, writer, director and editor. She's passionate about telling emotionally resonant, social relevant stories that amplify underrepresented voices. So she's truly a girl of my own heart. And her background is actually in psychology, and her experiences are both across live action and animation content. As an editor, she's contributed to many projects such as Jojo and Gran Gran for CBeebies and Love Monster, and also Pip and Posy. Anyone who's got kids will hopefully know all these titles. She's also directed some of her own films and starred in those too for Netflix and BBC. And she's here today to talk about her career journey as a UWE alumni as well. Okay, that's it from me. I hope you have a lovely evening, and I'll be back at the end to shepherd us all into drinks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mel. Lovely to see everybody, and welcome to those watching and listening online. I'm going to ask you a completely off-piece question here. Who's your favourite drummer of all time?
John Bonham.
Oh, look at that, straight off. I thought you might say Ginger Baker.
No, John Bonham of Led Zeppelin, or Elvin Jones of the John Coltrane Quartet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. A high bar there. And where's your talent in relation to theirs?
Very, very low compared to them.
I'm sure that's not
Very,
true.
very low. But I've pinched, but there's famous stories about John Bonham, just one of the great rock and roll drummers. And too many stories to tell, but he invented all sorts of things on the drum kit that nobody else can do. And so most of us spend our life watching YouTube videos trying to do one thing that Bonham did.
Yeah.
And it takes you about 5 years to learn to do one thing. And I did learn to do one thing, and I dropped it into a gig the other day, and nobody noticed.
But you knew.
I knew.
So,
I knew.
So what attributes do you need to be a good drummer?
It's really simple. I think rhythm sections in bands are... Buddy Rich said something once, didn't he? I think he said you can have a mediocre band with a good drummer and there'll be a good band. You can have a good band with a mediocre drummer and there'll be a bad band. Okay. So I think drummers have a lot of responsibility. They have a responsibility to make the things swing. But what you notice is that a metronomic drummer, so like a kind of, a bit like a kind of, I can't believe we're talking about this, but a metronomic drummer is not really what you want. The band I play at the moment has got an amazing bass player who is very precise. It means I can move around the beat. And Charlie Mingus said this thing, talking about jazz, that the beat is like a circle with a dot in the middle, and jazz happens somewhere between the two. And I think that's the thing, is that you have to be you have to listen, you have to be responsive, but you have to take responsibility if you're playing the drums.
So you've taken responsibility for lots of things, haven't you?
Here we go. Yeah. Fell for that, didn't I?
You did. So let me take you back. Can you remember your first day walking through the door at Faber?
I can. And in fact, in a funny way, I would probably say that it happened before I walked through the door. I'd sort of got the job. I loved Faber. I loved what Faber did, but I was pretty angry with Faber because I just felt that the world was changing in the late 90s, and Faber was standing slightly in its ivory tower, expecting the world to come to it still. And that is not where media and art and culture were, And but I had a sales and a marketing background and a reading background, so I was slightly in awe of Faber too, and presumed they didn't want someone like me. So in my interview, I was extremely rude to them. About what I really thought was their abnegation of responsibility. So I did fall to the floor on the pavement outside after I'd done the interview and went, what have I done, But when I was but I got the job, and I was at home, and a manuscript arrived. And this was probably about 6 weeks before I actually walked through the door and started the job. And it was a novel by John McGahan called That They May Face the Rising Sun. And, in my career in publishing, I'd sold gardening books, I'd imported books on personal computers, I'd sold Terry Pratchett, and I'd done Gilly Cooper, but I'd also sold some literature. But I had never worked somewhere like Faber. And my heart as a reader was in that canon, and I read a page of this book, and it is the most extraordinary novel. Please go away and read John McGahan's That They May Face the Rising Sun. But the minute I finished reading it, I threw up.
Wow.
I went, and the sheer enormity of what I had said I could do dawned on me, because it was like reading Chekhov. It was just sort of evidently long-lasting, important literature. And so when I arrived at Faber, I'd probably been through a bit of that. But the thing that was extraordinary, I think, is that, these places, they have this sort of enormous cultural responsibility, but also there's a day job. And I think when I put my feet under the desk, sat down, switched on the computer and said, how's this publishing company going to become really successful again? I knew what I was doing. But the sense of weight did not ever go away. The sense of not because Faber alone is important. I think it was because, which is a danger, I think, with some of these cultural brands, is that you end up thinking you are the story. You're not. You're participating seriously in a story that's not yours, actually. The story is in the writing and in the reading and in the culture. And so to run it to its very best ability to take its role in that was what became the job.
So for those that don't know, just give us a sort of two-paragraph précis of why Faber had and has the reputation it has, and the great love and the respect and the reverence. That's obviously changed from when you began to now, not the respect and the love and the,
it's all gone away.
deference. No, it hasn't, but
Yeah.
just explain why Faber sort of stood outside the kind of main publishing houses.
I think, so Faber's an independent, is where we start. And, it was founded in 1925, Faber and Guire was the first incarnation. But in 1929, it became what it is now, Faber and Faber. It was named Faber and Faber because poet de la Mare said to Geoffrey Faber, who wanted a name to change from Faber and Guire, and there was only one Faber, Geoffrey, and de la Mare said it's a bit boring being Faber. Why not call yourselves Faber and Faber? It's much more poetic. So there was only ever one Faber, but we're a piece of poetic fiction from the very beginning, and. But I think it was that actually Faber in the 1930s particularly was at the heart of modernism. And so there is T.S. Eliot was the poetry editor at Faber from 1926 to 1965 when he died. And so the story of Faber, I think, was always that there was somehow a serious endeavor about surfacing particularly the best poetry. But then from 1956 onwards, we published, the first 4 plays we published were Look Back in Anger, The Maids by Jean Genet, Murder in the Cathedral by T.S. Eliot, and I think Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett. So when Faber moved into plays in a similar way to poetry, it was a high stakes, high reputation, a danger, if you like, of being a canonical publisher. What we chose was, and I think now that we look back on these periods of cultural history, we have some queasiness about that sort of power, rightly so to be queasy about it. But Faber has had many sort of incarnations, and so there was this sort of modernist incarnation, then there was, an extraordinary period, I guess, in the 50s and early 60s when the drama and the poetry, you've got Ted Hughes and Seamus Heaney and Sylvia Plath. You have those playwrights. But then when you get to sort of the 1980s, there was a kind of re-flourishing of Faber where the double F, which people will recognise where that was done by Pentagram, the covers became kind of all sort of out of a sort of European style tradition, and there was new editorial leadership, and that editorial leadership brought an amazing range of novelists, particularly from Kazuo Ishiguro to Barbara Kingsolver to Peter Carey to Hanif Qureshi, extraordinary, and Milan Kundera even. And you look at that sort of rebirth as a kind of fiction house, and that was at a time in the 80s where there was a revolution in publishing, which was about bookshops, the first of maybe 6 revolutions in my working life. And I think at that stage, the sort of connecting up that sort of literary publishing with a much broader audience. The Booker Prize had a lot to do with that, sort of media interest, but the growing number of bookshops on our high streets in the late 1980s. My first job was in a bookshop in Croydon. That was my, when I realised I was a failed rock star. It was a dark night.
But you're showing resilience and persistence because you're still playing, Stephen.
Yeah, but
That's
the word
fantastic.
star has gone away. I play. But I think there was an extraordinary environment there, and Faber as an independent house with this very kind of sharp brand and identity remade by Matthew Evans and Robert McCrum and Joanna Mackle and that team who were at Faber at that time. They really kind of raised it as cool. It was a cool. Pete Townsend sat on the editorial committee. It was a very sort of extraordinary moment. And I think we've done something similar again, probably, over the last 10 or 15 years with the arrival of a different group of writers, spearheaded probably by Sally Rooney and by Anna Burns and by Claire Keegan. So there's something happening again and in poetry. So Faber, but I think there's something about independence that is important.
So how has it retained its independence? I mean, that's the big question, isn't it? How has it? Because Waterstones, and we've got so many big branded bookshops on the high street. Amazon will deliver you one. If I buy it now, it'll come through the door before we finish this conversation.
Yeah.
Books are so much more readily available than they were, in the 60s and the 70s. And we tend to think that scale is a good thing, and the bigger we get, the better we can be. But Faber has really retained that independence, which is admirable. But what's the trick to that?
I think at the core of any taste, it has to be, or the expression of kind of the choices you make, what you invest in, and as a publishing house, the choices you make of the writers you back, and your willingness and your capacity to stay with them in the long term has to be the central issue. You can have so much sales and marketing as much as you like. You can navigate the market, you can be clever and commercial, but really it doesn't matter if you haven't got the material to work with. So Faber remained editorially centred, through all the periods of, in the end, so Faber's acquiring process, certainly now and when I was in charge and before, was always, if the editors want to take a book on, the question is not shall we, the question is how shall we. So, I worked at big publishing houses where, as a sales and marketing leader, you just sat there with a shotgun on your veranda waiting to say, well, we'll have that one and we'll have that, And it's not how to, it's foolish actually, because in the end, the market will tell you what people wanted yesterday. It will always be hungry to repeat, but people don't repeat. There's a fantastic quote in Mad Men somewhere along the line. I'm not sure I didn't dream it actually, because I can't find it in Mad Men. But Don Draper says to his team at one stage, "You do know what everybody wants, don't you?" And his team look a bit scared, and then he just says, "They want normal, but with a twist." And we, ladies and gentlemen, are the twist, is what he says, which is cynical. But actually, when I think about what writers do, that's the joy of writing, is that you find voice and you find just originality, and that's what you're looking for. You can't make that, and you can't sort of manufacture it. So you have to be alert as an organisation. You have to believe in and trust your editors, and your editors are not always the most functioning, organised. They're very various. But they have a sort of ability to have that sense of what is new and what's original, without it being so sort of away from people's sensibilities that it's not going to communicate. And so I think our success has won that. But I think secondly, we very much decided that publishing as a model for the independents had to be innovated. We had to innovate. And the innovation at Faber is to say, our job was to make sure that Faber was never lost its independent status. You know, I think Faber's the only pre-war, sort of interwar publishing house that has not gone in to become an imprint of a larger company. And imprints are terrific. You know, I worked on Fourth Estate when it was bought by HarperCollins. It's now a very strong imprint at HarperCollins. But imprints are different to companies. In a company, your entire existence is about what you publish as that one imprint, that one imprimatur, that one company. And I think it creates something entrepreneurial, and it creates something kind of like a buccaneering boat. You're a crew on one boat. And I think when we innovated, we decided that actually the problem, one of the commercial problems with literature is that you can't say, let's have a crime novel every year like that. You know, let's have a brand, let's create brands that repeat. You don't do that. Writers deliver when they do. You don't write to Tolstoy saying, can you hurry up with Anna Karenina, you know. So we had to create a model that was a bit cash friendlier, because the outcome of the fact that in publishing, you invest in the writer with the advance or a portion of it, and you don't get that back till you have received the manuscript, you've put it into a book, you've put it in the market, you've lent the books to the book trade, whether they sell them or not. You know, the cash arc is extremely painful in publishing. And you do that on a kind of portfolio of speculation. And so I think we felt we had to do things to change the business a bit, to be more resilient to ups and downs in sort of literary good fortune. And the fortune is when people deliver books. And so we created a creative writing school. We created called the Faber Academy. We created an alliance with other publishers that was to do with solving the issue that the market got very mass market. You know, the supermarkets came in and price became flexible. So we created a service, and we created one for digital as well. So we thought of ourselves as a business that was really about reading and writing, which had this core enterprise, which is the publishing, but we were willing to put our brand to other things and to start saying, but they had to be serving readers and serving writers, but also ideally they had to have a slightly more reliable profile.
Because it strikes me that books and publishing has been kind of at the forefront of innovation and technological change, you know, because it had to really. And there was sort of great concern and great fears, weren't there, that nobody would read a book anymore. We would only read it electronically, or we'd listen to it, and book sales would go down. But actually, that's not the case, is it? And
No.
in fact, it's been innovation has been complementary to narrative and stories.
Yeah, and I think that the clue is with Caxton, you know, that in the end, technology tends to amplify the opportunity to find readership for writers. And when you look at, you know, if I look at the major pieces of technological advancement that have hit publishing, you find that actually each of them has contributed to our growing opportunity. They usually come accompanied by enormous amounts of kind of doomsaying and panic. And so, for instance, you know, ebooks were... I first held an ebook reader in 1992.
Was it this big?
Yeah, it was called the Rocket Book, and it couldn't have been worse named. There was no hope of getting that off the ground. You know,
it's like the first mobile phone. You needed
enormous.
somebody to carry it for you.
I had one of those. It was like,
brick.
you know, I used to have to carry this thing around like you were in the Territorial Army, you know. And but, you know, it was then 15 years later that the Kindle was launched, along with the Kobo and the Sony device, and you know. But publishing, you know, and I was told absolutely categorically in around 2001 that no one will be reading print books by 2010. You know, now Faber's current percentage of ebook reading is around 13 to 15% of our business.
Wow.
We're 85% print. But in 2013, we were probably more than 20% E. What's been so interesting about technology and the growth of technology is that, of course, you know, this room's full of readers, you know, people who try. And so we had a lot of people reading Kindle devices. Of course, Kindle devices became, then smartphones arrived around the same time. It all happens around 2007. But then people realize when they find that useful and when they don't. And also, I think there was something going on in the late sort of noughties that was that we as an industry in publishing forgot our artisanal nature.
Yeah.
You know, a book is a beautiful physical thing that you hold in your hand. It is the most flexible piece of technology. I mean, we can have a paperback, but we don't feel. Mind you, I was on a train in about 1989, and there was someone reading Nausea by Sartre sitting opposite me, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. And then he just tore half the book out and chucked it out the window because he'd read that half. And I felt someone had sort of rammed a stake through my heart. You know, can't do that to a book, but of course you can. You know, so books are a remarkably portable piece of technology for carrying around sort of ideas and stories and education. And the ebook was just another version of that. And people found their balance with it. But also publishers remembered that the book is a physical artifact. And if you're going to demand value for that artifact, you've got to start making it well. And something remarkable happened in 2012, which was that James Dawn came to see me in my office and told me two remarkable things. One, that Waterstones had been bought by a Russian oligarch, as it turns out, and secondly, he was going to run Waterstones. And very early on, James was incredibly clear that he didn't need all books in his shops, but what he did need was books that his customers were seduced by and loved. They had to be good books, but they also had to be well manufactured. And I think we remembered ourselves at that stage, because publishing has been always largely about, you know, once you've got great content, then it's about design. It's about beauty, it's about the gorgeousness, it's about shapes and sizes, it's about energy you put into a book. And I think we had sort of forgotten that. I think there's a 5-year period where Richard and Judy, supermarkets, commodification of books to some degree, bled our sort of, and at Faber we held on, but we were bent out of shape too. And I think something in remembering that, and a whole bunch of people remembered it at the same time. So the independent sector in books exploded at that time. All these amazing bookshops we go to now, which have cafes and events, incredibly hard-working staff. These are the best bookshops I've ever sold a book in my 40-year career, and they turned up in around 2012 to now. Amazing shops. So that kind of analog thing, I think, was an extraordinary part of design and success.
And I think that's really interesting, because I think there's a correlation between that, you know, remembering what your absolute core function is. What is the thing that you are brilliant about? You know, what is the great thing about writing and books? It's about how they look and they feel and the experience of them. And I think there's a sort of correlation between where we are in creative industries at the moment, isn't it? How do we remember what the core, what we're really good at, what our skill is, what our talent is, what the product is? Because the way to get that product out is baffling, because there's so much of it, isn't there? When did you decide, or when did you feel that you wanted to use some of your experience in publishing in the kind of wider creative industries space? And we'll get on to some of the things you've done in that. But where did you decide to look outside of Faber and say, I can apply some of this knowledge, I can apply some of the experience, and also there are other things outside that I'd like to bring into the company? When was that?
Well, I think one of the joys of working at Faber, so we have a summer party at Faber, and it's always an event where you go and you see, you know, there are actors and directors and screenwriters, as well as playwrights, as well as novelists, as well as, you know, and booksellers, and it was always this sort of extraordinary, and politicians, and, you know, and I always felt that Faber was a sort of it was the truth, which is that, you know, publishing houses exist they have a series of sort of capital. They have capital, financial capital, to invest in writing, but they also have to recognise they have political capital and cultural capital, and that means responsibilities. They have social capital, and I think I always felt that very strongly, and I just met people, I think, through Faber's publishing. But then I was president of the Publishers Association in 2007-8, and we had yet another challenge to copyright. It was the Gowers Review of Copyright, and we once again had to explain to politicians, which has happened many times, that copyright is not an antiquated thing. It's not. It's an adapting, changing thing. But it is the way that people who create get paid. And, you know, if you want people to create, you better have a strong intellectual property. And I think it was that moment when I ended up having to really lobby, sit in front of government and explain this. People can, you know, and that thing of saying, if I came into your house and took your sofa, how would you feel? And they say, you can't do that. And I go, I know. So how would you feel? How would a writer feel if you came into his work and stole his work? How would you feel? And just trying to get them to understand that property is property, and intellectual property is a hard concept for people. They find it hard. But so there was that, and then I ended up sitting on something called Creative Skill Set at the time, which was a sector skills council. And publishing had not really had any conversation around, other than as educational publishers, around the education and skills system that delivered, opportunity to the widest representation in our society. So I got involved in that, and that led me to much more kind of regular interaction with government, which led me to sit on the Creative Industries Council and the task force where we met.
Yeah. So that's very interesting, because you're talking about copyright as being a kind of light bulb moment for you to think about the challenges and bring your expertise into a political arena. And of course, it's pretty much the same now, but we're talking about IP and AI and how we create IP and how we protect our IP. And when we were both on the task force, there was a lot of conversation about how do you do that. How do you feel about that now? I'm not going to ask you to tell me what you think about AI writing a book, because we're not going to go there. But what about the stealing of people's work? Because that's the thing that all creatives, and I'm sure creatives in the audience and those listening online, it makes your blood pressure, because you go, that's mine, that's my work, that's me.
Well, and I think back to sort of 2005 when we had the kind of Google copying every book in the Library of Alexandria. Yeah, anyway, but that we're at another of those junctures where, because it's not hard, you simply have to explain what you have used to train your. You have to ask permission, and you have to pay. It's really not hard, and yet the licensing models, which is all it takes, which is sitting all around us, every other piece of where we transfer a piece of intellectual property from one place to another, you license it to somebody on the basis of terms that you agree. And why that would not apply right now is another moment where it's inconvenient. It's inconvenient to acknowledge that the extraordinary value that will be created around artificial intelligences and around LLMs and is being built on the work of others, and you just can't let that pass. So, and unfortunately, of course, it's a gold rush. But there's a double gold rush going on, because, we're not alone in this country of seeing the enormous opportunity of the creative sector and the creative and cultural sectors. But it's alongside a gold rush towards being a hot place for artificial intelligence. And unfortunately, every case that comes up, you just say governments have to get much clearer about and have to legislate on the need for transparency. We just need to know what you've used. We need to know that you asked permission, and we need you to pay.
Yeah. And we've all got to keep on lobbying about that and explaining it with clarity, and the importance of why it's hugely influential to the careers of not only people that are practicing and making work now, but those in the future, I guess.
And if we don't get that clarity, all it will be is a series of long legal contests, which is going to cost the sectors involved enormous amounts of money, which could be put into investing into creation. And it's exasperating, but it's also just necessary to stay. When we deal with government, we just have to stay calm, stay patient, stay reasonable, but not step back from the things that really matter. And this really matters.
It does really matter. But there is also some fantastically good news around the whole of the creative industries, isn't there? Because it's not long ago that people wouldn't have even known what creative industries were. You might have worked in film or television, you might have been an actor or a painter or a publisher, but actually there wasn't a sector, an industrial sector, that we could say, we all belong to that industrial sector. Isn't that great? And here we are with a government that has put creative industries front and centre in its industrial strategy. We in the West of England are very fortunate to be a creative industries priority place. Thank you very much, DCMS, for that, because it gives us an opportunity to really consolidate. That's got to be a great thing, isn't it? Because we know that creativity will drive the next 100 years, 150 years, however long, I don't know.
Yeah,
We'll all
yeah,
be,
yeah. No,
we'll all,
it's central.
I'll be not here by then. But it's central to everything. It will be central to jobs, to skills, to the way that we lead our lives. It's very exciting.
It is, and you know, I do those. I do some speakers for schools events, and you go in, and it's still true that you go into schools with careers departments, and you know, and the understanding of our sector is still, you know, very, very poor. And I did a talk the other day to a school in Leicester, and they said to me, "We're going to ask the business students to come in. Is that all right?" I was like, "Well, yeah, because." You know, we're an industry, you know, and as I started to talk, I was just doing that thing of saying, who can guess what's in the creative sector? And there was, you know, immediately they think of artists and actors and writers. But when you start to say, you know, no, you know, who plays games? And every hand in the room goes, well, they're part of our sector. And then you explain that we need people who can market things and people who are brilliant at finance, and we need people who can, you know, build things. And the sort of extraordinary range of jobs that we need as well. And then when you explain that we're the fastest growing sector in the British economy, that we employ 2.3 million people, we're going to employ 3 million people within the next decade, which is twice as much as the National Health Service, way more than the finance sector. You know, but nobody, it's still the case. It's wonderful news that we're out there, but we have a, you know, as a sort of people who tell stories, for some reason, we haven't told our own story yet well enough so that it resonates. But I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying that it's such good news. We need to get that news out there, that this is an extreme, and it's not a sort of, it's a real career. Some of it's difficult because of our, you know, we're a third freelance as a sector, and we have our ups and downs. But it's very, very exciting that government has recognised it. I think one of the things that we were talking about a little bit earlier, some of the machinery of government's a bit slower. So when we try to get a skills and education system that support our sector, or when we try to get Treasury to understand what we need, you know, that can be a little bit slower. But the politicians across the piece, maybe, have recognised that.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing about it is we all know, and we may have stayed in our creative industries lane in our careers, or we may have, you know, gone into different things, but we all know that those are completely transferable skills. You can work in any industrial sector if you have some creative skills, whether you're a writer or a filmmaker or a coder, because, I mean, what company does not need a filmmaker?
No.
You know, you couldn't have said that 10 years ago, because communication wasn't visual. Communication is visual now, so every single company needs a filmmaker. I guess it's about shifting, isn't it, the perspective to say, I mean, I mean, my tribe is telly, obviously, and you know, that's going through enormous changes, and audiences don't switch on as I switched on, and all that kind of thing. But actually, the skills of telling stories with pictures, you can work anywhere now. You couldn't have done that when I started. They'd have gone, "What? No, that's telly. Go away. Why would the health service need somebody that can do those things?" So you know, it's like writing, isn't it? Everybody needs much more and much crisper and shorter and powerful writing. They do, and I think Lawrence Lessig said something interesting about 20 years ago. He said that video is the new vernacular. Yeah. You know, and our vernacular as a society is now moving pictures, and but I also think creativity goes beyond that, beyond those sort of skills that. And perhaps we haven't got this in the independent report on the national curriculum yet, but it's getting recognised, is that really what we want everyone to have is the ability to think critically, think originally, and to understand that creativity is not, you know, it's not some of those practices. It is about the ability to solve problems through being able to think originally. And creativity, I think, has this, you know, we're gradually getting, but there are societies, you know, Scandinavian societies, South Korea, places like that, where they're really recognising that you need a creative education. You don't just need an education in art subjects or in practice, you know, in writing, or you need actually to have an education whose outcome is that you're able to think for yourself critically and originally. And some of that comes from studying creative subjects, but some of it simply comes from the environment of education, and we're a long way from that. Yeah. We're a long way from that yet. But I think
you're quite right that there's, you know, the skills that used to be thought of as a part of the creative sector are pan economy.
Yeah, yeah, and we are at the beginning of this journey, aren't we? Because I mean, you know, if you listen to the big AI tech bros, if you listen to, we were talking about this Sam Altman at ChatGPT, he's got a 4 or 5 year old, and I was reading a piece, and he was asked to sort of, you know, paint a picture of the world that his son would grow up in, you know, and he said it's going to be fantastic because he's going to be able to do everything he wants. He's, you know, he's not going to have to work. Now, okay, if your dad is Sam Altman, you probably don't have to work, but you know that doesn't follow for the rest of us. But what he was trying to say is that the opportunities to create will be much greater and much broader than they are now, because AI is going to take over the task, and it is taking over the kind of daily grind task. So we don't need those people. You know, when I was at school, when maybe you at school, be an accountant, be a lawyer. That's, you know, go and do that. Don't think about going, great, don't be daft, don't be a thespian. That's no life. But actually, there's no guarantee that in 10 years' time that will be a really great career to be in, unless you can think critically and you can add a big dollop of creativity into the sort of, you know, daily work of being an accountant or being a lawyer. Yeah,
because everything's going to change, and it is going to change very fast. So the transition is going to be socially very challenging.
Yeah.
And but I don't think there's any doubt that the sort of area that we now describe as the creative or cultural sector is going to play a massive part in the future of economies and jobs and life. But you know, I think there's something. Yeah, when I say that, I think that publishing definitely has, and I'm sure that the creative sector generally has real sort of responsibilities towards telling stories that help people to understand change in society, and also to challenge, you know, some of the narratives that suit some people and not everybody else. So I think this is where some sort of social responsibility will come into our work. And also because artists and, you know, thinkers, creators are people who also help to describe the world we're in. And it's going to move really quickly. It's going to be bewildering, already is quite. And I think that sort of being a sector that isn't just sort of consumed by that, by the opportunities of AI, but thinks carefully about it and understands that there are going to be stories that need to be understood around how are we going to function as a society in the future. I think these things are going to be in our, you know, so our writers will be thinking like this at a publishing business. So as a publishing business, we have to take responsibility for putting those stories out into the world, and in our behaviour as a business, we have to model what we think is a responsible way to go about our work. So it's, you know, it's going to be a really interesting, challenging. I'm sure that we will, like with all technology, I'm sort of optimistic about the fact that we will figure out our way to be, but of all the things I've come across in my working life, I think AI is the most profoundly challenging, I think.
But you quite like a challenge, and you like change, and you've got great experience, and you're very generous with your time in sharing that experience, and not pulling up the drawbridge, or not the drawbridge, the rope ladder for those younger generations, which is something that I think our sector has been terribly bad at in the past, if I'm entirely honest. And you share your experiences in many ways, don't you? I mean, you coach quite a lot of young creatives. What made you want to do that?
Well, I guess that probably goes back to childhood. It's quite a profound thing. I grew up with someone who was very ill, and so I think I grew up in a family where, you know, your story couldn't be the only story. There was a need to care and to think about other people's experience, and I think something that led me through grief and other things through to psychotherapy and a lifelong interest in how do we deal with the difficulties of life and how do we help other people deal with it. And so throughout my publishing career, there was always a part of me that wondered about a career that looked like that, you know, that would have. And so when I got to 20 years of leading Faber, and we were in the middle of we were probably 6 months into the pandemic, and I felt confident that that we were going to get to the other side of that extraordinary period where every bookshop in the world closed, and and Amazon decided physical books were luxury items. Funny that. And suddenly I just thought, you know what? And I was working with a brilliant colleague, Mary Canham, who now runs Faber. I just thought, come on, be brave. It's time. Make room. Because also maybe I'll pursue something like this. And I got, the universe did its work, and I ended up training as a coach. And the coaching work has taken me, I used to sit on the board of the CLAW leadership program. So I ended up doing quite a bit of coaching and talking with CLAW fellows who are arts leaders who are being helped to sort of develop as leaders. And then I set up my own practice, having trained. And it just struck me as I set it up that the work I want to do has to have an element that is supportive of those who are changing the industry and who are coming from a wider range of backgrounds. And but also publishing is 63% female. And when I came into Faber, Faber had 2 female board directors out of 12. One was T.S. Eliot's widow, and the other had been there quite a long time. But now Faber has a 75% female board and has a female chief executive. And I don't say that I did that very deliberately, but I did feel at the time that gender was a real issue in the leadership of publishing, not in the staffing or the readership, but in the leadership of the publishing. And so I also decided that I wanted to try and, I had a lot of experience of managing and helping and supporting female leaders. So I also decided that was an important thing to try and do in other parts of the sector. So I do quite a lot of, I do have a majority of female clients.
Is there a sort of common concern that they share with you?
Again, one doesn't want to generalise too much about gender because it gets you into...
I wasn't talking about gender, but I was just talking about young aspiring leaders.
I mean, shit bosses is...
And what do you say? How do we deal with it? How do you deal with a shit boss?
You give them strategies for undermining their shit. No, you don't. I think you try and put them on the other side of the table and say, well, maybe you haven't got a shit boss, but maybe you have got a boss who is struggling to understand, to not being a very good boss, or has things on their mind that you don't understand, and so trying to help people. But also there's a lot of talk. Everyone's armed with language these days, so there's a lot of imposter syndrome. There's a lot of, I'm this, I'm that. And I try to undo that. I lack confidence. I always try and say, well, let's get specific. When do you lack confidence? Because you don't lack confidence, but there are occasions when you lose your confidence. So let's try and figure out what those are and why that happens, and let's give you some tools to overcome it. So I try to be really practical, not fall into, I think, the idea that there are sort of generalized problems. Because actually I only meet breathtakingly talented young people. I'm incredibly optimistic about Gen Z, millennials, everyone coming in, going to change things, they're going to challenge things, and they have very different outlook. Those generations have a very different outlook on some things. And I've always felt that, in the coaching part of it, it's just challenging those in a way that helps to understand how you're going to get your impact. Because you don't get your impact if you just stand up and say, well, this is what I think, the world's over there, it's a problem. I say, no, that world is your problem.
Yeah, and the young generation does expect different things from a workplace and from employment than you and I did, and the things that we accepted, and we could sit here all night and go, and then this happened. But actually it's about making sure that those things aren't replicated, and thank goodness that a lot of very, very poor behaviour is being changed. But actually it strikes me there's a kind of challenge now for new leaders that Gen Z, and we've got another one, haven't we? Aren't we on another one now?
Alpha, I think, aren't we?
Back
to Alpha.
At the beginning of the alphabet, anyway. So
who was the original Alpha? Was it the pre-Raphaelites or something? I don't know.
It must have been.
I'd love to know who the original
Alpha was. Somebody just do that calculation for us and go back that far. Thank you. But they demand very different things, don't they?
Yes, and
that is a real challenge.
Yes,
it's a good challenge.
Yeah, and I think let's try and characterise it as, the most when I did a talk about leadership the other day, and I find these things a bit excruciating because leadership with a sort of capital L is full of problematic sort of ideas. But you know, leadership is just a series of responsibilities you carry in a particular role. It's not with a capital L, it's with a single L. You know, you have to lead sometimes. But someone asked me, should I bring my whole self to work as a leader? And my answer was, well, I wouldn't even bring my whole self to myself. You know, why would you why would you do that? You know, and I think there's something here about the main attribute of leadership for me right now is listening. You know, if you can hear and if you can listen, then you can understand. And if you can understand, you can make things change. And I think, but the listening works both ways. So I think if we have sort of cultures that are about listening and being heard, and, you know, that leadership is heard and listened to in the same way that but leadership doesn't earn that right unless it listens. And so I think probably one of I feel like this is changing, and I feel those sort of very kind of, there was a lot of collision, perhaps between 2015 and 20, something like that. And I feel like there's there's better listening, but it's not universal. We have a long, long way to go. And because of course I think those younger generations are just simply they're politicized in a very different way, and I think their politics is the politics of now, and you know, and those of us who don't hear that politics are likely to get things wrong. So I think it is a lot about a culture of listening, but also a culture of respect and a culture that understands intention. You know, I'm not a Christian, but I do believe deeply in forgiveness and being able to allow people to say, I got something wrong, because those are the cultures where people learn and they thrive. And so I think, you know, but equally, if I could join publishing at the age of 21 right now, I would be really excited to do so. It would be hard to get in because it's always hard, but I just feel like the wave of talent and just energy and you know, belief is so exciting coming from these generations who are much like, you know, I'm a post-war child. I was born in 1965. My parents were born before the Second World War. I was born 20 years after that conflict finished. The world was in a very, my first awakening and discovery as a citizen, as a human being, was the Beatles. You know, and I was age 5. I watched the Beatles split up on telly, and somehow it made me profoundly sad. Aged 5, and then I listened to the Beatles and you know, that whole what happened to my parents' generation happened in the 60s. You know, and that revolution, I think, was something that sort of it's probably my revolution. You know, but there's another revolution going on, and it's not mine, but I've got to support it and be part of it, if you like.
And the other thing, just you know, you were talking about if you were joining Faber or a publishing house today, you'd be very, very excited. It would be difficult to get in. Of course, that's been another theme of your work, hasn't it? About wider participation, inclusivity, access, finding the talent where it is, and nurturing it to do its best work. What is it about that's been so important to you to give your time and energy? You were chair of Creative Access, as Mel mentioned, for a long time, an organisation absolutely dedicated to doing that, to finding opportunity for all and giving opportunity.
I mean, it sounds a bit stupid, really, but it's just the right thing to do. You know, I think when I look at the sort of absolutely appalling politics going on in North America right now, it really makes me angry. So yeah, I think in the end, I mean, we're both kids from the Midlands, as is Mel. We're a secret Midland triangle here. And yes, I was in a very middle class household, you know, and I'm a white male, you know, so I had all sorts of advantage. But even so, I arrived in publishing and was not on the in track, and that's extraordinary. You know, that feels to me mad. And so I just think it's the right thing to do. I also think, you know, and I buy and I believe in those sort of stories about the fact that we can only be successful as a sector if we imagine what will happen if we stop standing on a very narrow piece of ground. You know, imagine what happens if we actually stand on the ground that is our society or the world. You know, and but that's okay as an argument. But actually, deep down, I just think it's the right thing to do. I just believe it's just unfair otherwise, and I believe in fairness.
It's not an easy thing to do, and I'm going to ask our lovely friend Mevis to come up and talk to us, because I first met, Mevis has got a really interesting story, and I'm not going to tell her story, I'm going to ask her to tell her story, but I first met Mevis. We did, in fact, it was a joint bid for government money between the Watershed, where we are sitting now, and the University of the West of England, to create a thing called Creative Workforce for the Future, to think about how the creative industries and the cultural sector actually was quite closed and could be perceived as quite elitist and very difficult to get in. So how did we design a programme which attracted young people, not young people, just people really who had a desire and a passion and a talent for creativity and creative industries to be able to get that opportunity? And I am so pleased to say in there is Mevis. So Mevis, you are now a fully fledged creative editor working on big network shows, but not long ago you were doing something completely different.
Yes, I was. So I originally studied psychology at UWE, and I worked in the mental health sector for many years. And in, I'd say 2019, I got the itch and I was like, I can't do this anymore. And it was actually at the point where I was deciding to whether I should do a doctorate. And at that point, I got asked the big question of where do you see yourself in 5 years in this sector? And I was like, not here. And I was like, oh God, I should not be doing this anymore. And I was speaking to my sister and she was like, you've always loved film, you should consider doing that. And I was like, but I'll struggle, getting into it because I've not studied. And she's like, well, you're struggling in the thing you studied, so maybe you should struggle in the thing that you actually are passionate about, and then you won't struggle really. So then I was like, that's good advice. And I was looking around for different programs that are available, and I was lucky enough to land on the Creative Workforce for the Future, which was a pilot program at the time, and they were taking on different people, I think between the age of 18 to 35, I believe. Yeah. And during that time, it would be a year-long program where you'd be placed in different creative job industries and companies for different spans of a time. And we had like 3 months at one, 3 months at another, and then 6 months at your core company. And with that, I was able to learn different skills. So one of them, I was placed with Norwest Media Center, which was my core company, where I was working as a junior digital producer, and that encompassed me working from getting a client come in and they get a bid and they get to pitch what they want to kind of advertise. So I would write up a pitch and then produce it, film it myself, edit it, and then present it to the client, and they will decide whether they're going to use that as the advertisement or for marketing. And we're lucky enough that some of the things that we actually did were actually used. And then for another placement, I was working with admin studios where I worked as a development assistant, where my day was actually a fun day where I would, throughout my time there, 3 months, I'll spend the days reading scripts and deciding whether they need to be, they should be animation, because sometimes you get scripts and you're like, this actually should be live action rather than animation. So I got to kind of understand more about script reading and understanding what goes behind development of a script. And I also spent time doing their talent search. So they wanted to expand that talent beyond Europe, because a lot of their talent is Europe-based, and they wanted to know more about talent outside of that. So I spent my time looking for talent that I could match. And that gave me more insight in animation, because I didn't know anything about animation before that. Apart from I'd seen it, but I didn't appreciate the work that goes into animation. And that moved me on to my job at A Productions, which then I did the processing of animation. So I kind of helped out the layout team in putting in the assets that they needed. And with that, at both admin and A Productions offered me a job after the Creative Workforce for the Future, which I was lucky enough to get the opportunity, and then I then had the opportunity of having to decide, which one should I go with, because admin was development assistant, and then a productions were like, we actually think you might be suited in editing. Would you like to try that? We can give you training and actually pay for your training as an editor as well. And I was like, well, it's hard to pay for that, so I'll take that, please. So I took that opportunity, and I worked with them for 3 years, where I did for 1 year and maybe 2 months. 2 months or so, I worked as an assistant editor on Jojo and Grand and Love Monster. And during that time, I was lucky enough that the editors that I was working with and the directors I was working with were very keen to get me to advance. So they pushed me in editing reviews that have actually been sent by the client themselves. So then that helped me advance more and learn more about editing. And then by the end of that contract, I was then offered another project where then they asked me to become an editor on that project solely. So that really helped me learn more and also be able to run my own project as an editor as well. And that was a fulfilling moment of my life where I was it was being thrown in a deep end, but in a great way, because I was challenged in a different manner that I would have as an assistant. And most recently, I worked for another company, which I actually met through a productions, where I had gone to the company as an editor and 6 months into that contract, they asked me to become a senior editor instead, and then lead a team of 4. And that was, it has its challenge, because a lot of the times I would be the person who go to the other editors and be like, oh, how do I do this? And then suddenly everyone was coming to me, and I was like, oh, I'm the, wow, okay, responsibilities. But it was probably one of my most beautiful and most challenging times of my career, because then when you're thrown in such a responsible part of your job, you learn more about yourself, and you learn how you speak to people and how you interact with stress. And I always thought of myself as someone who is great with challenges and can adapt easily, but it wasn't until at the end of my work with them that I got feedback from my team, and it was really interesting to see how other people see me as well. And it was actually refreshing to know that what I thought of myself is the same as what other people saw, and that was really great for my career over time.
That's hugely impressive, isn't it, to make that change and to be able to achieve so much in a short space of time. So, any regrets? No regrets. Okay.
Definitely not.
And I'd love to be able to take some questions for the floor for both you and Stephen, and we're running short of time. But just tell me, what would you say to people who are just at the position you were before you said, I don't want to work in the health service anymore, I want to do something very creative, and just can't quite decide whether to do it or not? What would you say to them?
I would say, honestly, go for it. Because sometimes we are always at a stage where we're like, I want to be in the creative industry, or I want to do this, but I'm not sure exactly what to do. And this is where different programs come in, and they actually assist you with that, because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do in the creative industry. I knew I loved film and acting and the potential of writing, but I wasn't sure exactly what avenue I could actually step in, especially I didn't study it. So I would say the thing is, if you try and look for programs that could enable you to work on the job, so you can learn on the job and then be able to develop different aspects. And also, a lot of the times we forget that our skills that we already have from the different jobs are actually transferable. It's just that it's not clear cut that you can use this in that. It's a lot of the skills are very transferable. So you will probably already have most of the stuff. It's just that not exactly say that in the creative industry. So I would say definitely go for it. Look at the stuff you already have and compare with what the job specs are, and yeah, definitely jump into the industry.
And if I just build on that.
Yeah.
Often in publishing, for instance, you get a lot of people who apply, get very fixated on being an editor, or the jobs they've heard of. There are so many jobs no one's ever heard of. and they're really good jobs. They're
Yeah.
really interesting, and they demand a wide range of talents. And it's so wise of you to say that in the end, get in
Yes.
and try and find out things to do. And then going too narrowly and saying this is what I want to do before experiencing, and certainly so publishing, it's about editing, but marketing and rights and production and design, there's so many parts to the sector that people end up in, and they go, I thought I wanted to be an editor and I ended up as a salesperson. I thought I just thought it was the last thing I wanted to be. I absolutely loved it.
Well, we can take some questions. I think that's the great thing about having creative industries recognised as a sector, because it does give us the opportunity to start talking about this enormity of jobs and different opportunities which might have been a bit closed off. I think we've got about 5 minutes to take some questions for the floor. So please put your hand up. We have some microphones attached to human beings that will get to you. There we go. Straight in the middle.
Hi, I'm Louise. It's a question for Mavis. Did you get your programme opportunity and then leave your job, or did you leave your job and then just focus on getting the new opportunity in?
I got the program opportunity first, and then I left my job. But at that point, I was already leaving my job. I was at the end of it, and the program opportunity came along, and I was like, "Oh, swift move." So that actually helped a lot more, that I didn't have to panic in oh, what am I doing now? It's just, the transition was very similar at the right time, yeah.
Hi.
Another question over there.
Hi, probably for Stephen here. I was wondering, but maybe for Mavis, I don't know. Substack, that's a new front, or I don't know how long it's been going, but do you think it helps, brings anything to publishing or to film? I think there are some video stuff on that out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, how does it feature with you?
If I go, it's interesting. It's a lot of sort of publishing academics talk a lot about Substack. As an industry, I can tell you that it has not once come up in a conversation about something to acquire, to publish, except within the sort of activity of some writers. It's an enormous community and an amazing place, but in its kind of, it's not, if you like, it's not brought our audience somewhere else, and it's not particularly fueled our publishing. So it's a weird sort of, it's sort of like living next door to somewhere and looking over the garden fence and going, God, they're having a good time. And they look over your fence and go, you're all a bit orderly. But it seems to coexist. But in a way that I can't help feeling that sort of, I guess the digital world is full of such sort of carnivals of creation, isn't it? Fan fiction and all sorts of things like this. But it's funny how our industry, when that kind of funnel closes a bit, the sort of through agents, through people getting published, it's kind of the same. And Substack has not subverted that in any way. But equally, I don't think we talk about it enough. It's probably true. We don't quite talk about it enough as a place to find things. It's an amazing place.
I think it gives people a lot of opportunity to talk, to tell their stories.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. That kind of has been done in television, hasn't it? And,
yeah.
I just think it's...
I agree, and I think the thing that Substack and there's other platforms, video and film and music, where you and YouTube does it to a certain extent. How do you make money out of your talent? And of course, Substack allows you to make money out of writing without the parameters of a company or a newspaper or a magazine. It's your thoughts. So they're really interesting models, I think, because it was always a dilemma. If you didn't, when I started as a newspaper journalist, if you wanted to be a journalist, you had to work for a newspaper, or you had to work for radio or television, because you couldn't earn any money doing it in any other way, whereas now you can self-publish and be paid a little bit. So in that kind of freelance economy, I think those kind of platforms, Substack, I'm going to say OnlyFans, but every time I say that, everybody goes, don't say that. But it's that kind of monetary model for publishing your own work, finding your own fan base, finding your own...
Well, and I think there's a thing, publishing, when we talk about publishing, people often think that you're talking about the businesses that make, that become the, but actually, when I look at indie authors generally, Kindle will tell you that there's an equally sized world of indie authors as there is of ebooks from publishing houses. And, foolishly, I think very early on, publishers sort of did this sort of slightly eye roll, it's the slush pile. Well, yeah, that's a really pejorative way to talk about the fact that actually here's a lot of writing that people enjoy that wasn't getting through you. And let's be honest, your work isn't, what you chose is not any reason for you to say it's any better. Mm. So I think, for readers and for writers, the explosion of the indie author, whether it's through the Kindle Direct or whether it's through Substack or other thing, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. And we just play our part in it. We are not it. The publishing industry is not the story.
And technology has allowed us to really think
That's
about
right.
that properly.
Yeah.
So you need your own YouTube channel. Maybe that's your next step, all right? And your own fans.
I'll be working on that.
I think we've got time for one more question, and there is a question over there.
It's a question for Stephen, and I thought I'd try and ask you something that kind of reflected lots of the versions of aspects of yourself that you've shared with us tonight, I think. So I'll give this a go. As a reader, what kind of literary fiction would you recommend that we kind of turn to coach us through this period of bewildering change? What are you reading, and what should we be looking to?
So what am I reading? I'm wow, what a question. So I think okay. So I'll play a small ace. I was at the Nobel Prize with Kazuo Ishiguro. And
shall we all just go now?
And I was in the room when he made his speech. And one of the things he said in his speech was, it is essential that as a publishing community that we recognize stories that are about the world we're in, because they may well be bewildering. They may well not be as we recognize stories to have been told in the past. And I was with 15 publishers, some of the great publishers around the world, and we were all deeply moved by this. And as a reader, I think I sort of took that a bit to heart, and so I do try to make sure that my reading, if I'm feeling, if Brentford have lost and I'm feeling maudlin, I'll go and read some Chekhov, come on, why wouldn't you? But you can't just sit and read Chekhov in your back room. You have to read other. But I'll say what I've just read. I just read an extraordinary book by Jamaica Kincaid called Annie John. Now, it's set in Antigua in the 1950s, 60s, I suppose. But as a book that made my, just that thing of opening your head and opening your mind and hearing another voice and another language of literature. So I just think part of it is about, in these times where we're so everyone wants you to be so binary, for or against, thumbs up, thumbs down, all of that stuff. I hate it. I want to become more plural, more to multiply my experience. So I think if there's anything, I would say it's to do that and do it. A lot of things we need to do quite deliberately now, because I think there's habit and we can get stuck. We can get stuck and we can reassure ourselves and we can retreat, particularly my generation. I'm 60 now. It'd be very easy for us to go, oh, well, let's let them sort it all out. I don't think we have that. We are culpable and responsible, so we can't walk away. And I have kids in their 20s. And so I think reading as widely and as challengingly as we can, and I mean reading things we disagree with, reading things that we're uncomfortable with, things that we're upset by, but also hearing other voices. I think that's how we've got to be. We've got to be the solution, which is to be able to be plural.
That inspires me, because when I'm making film or writing film, I tend to go for topics that are like challenging and taboo to be talked about. So that really resonates with me with reading books that are that challenge your thought process. And when I watch film, I also want to go away from a film and think, what did that teach me about society? What did that teach me about me? What did I learn from it?
What did you last read?
Book-wise, Like I told you, I'm currently reading The Courage to be Disliked, and that, coming from a psychology background, is very interesting because obviously it's about a philosopher speaking to a youth, but in the way they speak, it seems like a coaching therapy session as well. So when I do read it, sometimes I'm like, oh, that what the youth has said, I resonate with that because I feel that. And then sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't agree. So it's very challenging but beautiful in learning about yourself.
I think
Perfect.
it's just the greatest title, isn't it? The courage
To be disliked.
to be disliked. And on that note, sadly, we have come to the end of our time, and I'm just going to ask Mel to come back up to the podium. We should all have the courage to be disliked. Shouldn't we?
I'd just like to say thank you so much to our speakers tonight, Stephen, Lynn and Mavis. Thank you so much for joining us. I felt like it's part therapy session, part kind of creative sector kind of call to action. Thank you very much. Can I ask for a round of applause for our speakers? The evening is not over. Hopefully you will join us in the bar very shortly, and we have a few more bits of content and contributions to share with you. Just before we go, Yui asked me to do a few very quick reflections on what we've talked about this evening. So I've distilled it down to 3 things. So here you go. So the first is remembering your core function, which probably includes sometimes the courage to be disliked. So what is your core function? And I think as well as a sector like a publishing or TV or whatever sector we're in, that also applies personally. What is my core function as a storyteller, as a leader, as a mentor, and being able to stick to it, even if that means being a book cover in a world of Kindles. Second, learning from tonight is that incredible, very human, irreplaceable skill of thinking critically and originally. Yes, AI is going to transform our workplaces and our personal lives as well, but it remains to be seen that if an AI would ever be created that could think as critically, originally and creatively as human brains. I don't think it's going to happen. That's the optimist in me. And those are the skills that we need to nurture and retain. And the third thing was just to quote Stephen saying, work has to be supportive of those changing the industry. Be brave, make room. So as we all move and shake in our different circles and we all move into roles of more responsibility, leadership, it's remembering to make room and be brave in those times. It would be easy just to close the door and just look after yourself. But I think one of the things that creatives do well is look around, speak to each other, support each other, make connection. Making connection is how we make our great content. So that includes making room for all the people around us to rise up. So what an incredible bit of wisdom to leave on. Just final notes just to say there's a few things that you can do to support us, so please do give us your feedback. You'll get a feedback form on email, and if you fill that out, it helps us make these events even better and richer and full of the things that you want, so please do take that time if you can. We're going to be moving into Waterside 3 now for some refreshments, and there's some fantastic books for you to look at in there as well. So in Waterside 3 we have contributions from Zinezilla, which is an alumni arts festival that brings together a market hall of independent creatives, interactive talks and workshops, so they'll be showcasing some of their fantastic work. Also joining us in Waterside 3 is Camille Aubrey, a freelance illustrator based in Bristol with over 10 years of experience, and their practice centres on social and climate justice and accessibility, using their illustrations to amplify marginal voices. So please do have a look at Camille's work, and also various zines and books from the students from the UB Bower Ashton Publishing Lab. So there's lots of stuff to feast your eyes on, physical book covers for you to enjoy, and some drinks as well. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure to host you, and hopefully to see you in Waterside 3 very shortly. Thanks. Good night.